Okay, this is my video about One Battle After Another. So let's just talk about my reactions to the film. I saw it in IMAX here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I'm very glad that I saw it in the best format locally accessible, because the IMAX-ness of the movie, the fact that it was really made to be seen in a large screen format, obviously it was great, to have that experience and to see the film as it was intended. And it was a film beautifully shot and made, constructed, edited. All the elements of a big screen spectacle were present and very well executed. So I went into the film under a bit of a sense of obligation, if you will, just because of all of the build-up, the hype, the positive reviews, the ecstatic out-of-body experience reviews that this is easily the film of the year, the film of the decade, Best Picture winner, front-runner, multiple noms at the Academy Awards, and all the other, festivities coming up towards the beginning of next year. And this is a movie that's just gonna, blow right through all of that and take home lots of hardware. Well, I'm not exactly sure that that's how it's going to turn out. And I thought that going in, and I thought that coming out, but I think it may do well. I think there's definitely going to be a lot of nominations, and we'll see what the competition shapes up like. Not that I'm really too concerned about that anyway, but it just adds a certain layer of expectations of what we're about to experience when we sit down to watch this movie, for the first time and presumably again, because this is a big movie. It's a major movie. And it's one that pretty much demands a revisit if you really want to kind of get all the value out of what Paul Thomas Anderson has put together. I am not like an automatic PTA fan. I didn't see most of his recent films in the theater, like Inherent Vice or Licorice Pizza. And when I got around to watching them, I liked Inherent Vice pretty well. I didn't care for Licorice Pizza really at all. I didn't like either the woman or the kid who are in the leads. It's not even about the age differences and on all of the sort of controversy around that. I just didn't really enjoy hanging out in their space, or I couldn't find a way to connect or relate to them as somebody that I would admire or even care about what happened to them. I'm sort of a mixed bag with Paul Thomas Anderson. I really like There Will Be Blood. That's probably my number one movie of his, just because I think the themes are very interesting to me, and the characters and that period of history. And Magnolia I like because of its huge ambition and kind of messiness and all over the place. Anyways, I don't come in thinking, well, everything that PTA does is just going to be great, and I just can't wait to, So, but this one here definitely seemed, from what I knew about it, and I didn't try to read a whole lot about it, but I understood that there was a political angle, there's a kind of a revolutionary movement that gets disrupted, and the members of that movement go underground, and then one of them, the Leonardo DiCaprio character, has to resurface because of the danger that he and his daughter, as it turns out, are put in. And so that's where One Battle After Another comes from. He's trying to, engage in revolutionary struggle. Then he has to go underground just for survival and self-protection. But then he has to come back to the surface and resume the fight. That's kind of what I walked in thinking that the name of the movie implied. When the movie first started, I had a difficult time getting on board with the political angle. I wasn't sure where this was going. Was this like a cool, hard-edged, steely, political thriller a la The Battle of Algiers, which is referenced, obviously, in the early part of the film. Now, that's a movie I've watched several times over the years, and I first became aware of it back in 2004, I think it was, when Criterion released it. And the Iraq War was kind of in its, shock and awe phase. And The Battle of Algiers was a pretty vivid statement about the brutality of occupying and imperialist forces trying to manage a society that's not their own, and the resilience and the determination of the resistance. And it's like, there's no fooling around here. These people are deadly serious on both sides. And, I don't think of The Battle of Algiers as a movie with a lot of humor to it. There may be some times where laughs ensue or There's some comic relief. I don't really recall any of those moments, but to me, it's a pretty serious movie, kind of hardcore and kind of unflinching, portraying the revolutionary mindset as well as the occupier and repressive mindset that that the opposing forces, the colonialists, will try to approach it with, and deadly serious. And so I was kind of thinking that PTA was going to portray the revolution in those terms, or if he was trying to talk about a serious revolutionary movement that was going to try to disrupt and potentially even overthrow the United States or alter the status quo, if that's what the French 75, or if that's what the group is trying to accomplish, I just felt like their approach was really weak sauce and kind of silly. As the movie went on, I understood that this is a little bit more of a comedic take on all of that, but I wasn't really clearly aware of it at the beginning. And when I see, the revolutionaries kind of strutting around robbing a bank and putting their face on video surveillance, they didn't take the surveillance out. They're proclaiming their power and all of that. I just felt like, yeah, good luck with that. You might have a week or two of some kind of glory or feeling like you're really showing the man what's going on. But in the surveillance state that we currently live in, your ass is going to be busted down pretty quickly. There's not going to be anywhere really to hide. And I kind of wasn't sure at the time when I was watching it, is this like a movie set in like present day 2025 or maybe within the last couple of years? And then I know there was a 15, 16-year gap between, when Leo and his crew go underground and then when the action picks up again in the movie. But apparently this was supposed to have happened back in the 2008, 9, 10 era. And now when the movie jumps forward in time, we're in our own present day. And I'm like, I sure don't recall any leftist activist group in the 2010s and the Obama years that was conducting themselves or pushing that hard and towards the direction of a violent political upheaval. That wasn't happening. And so I guess we're in an alternate universe here, kind of a world that looks a lot like the world we live in, but the forces of political radicalism are a lot more belligerent, a lot more armed and deadly, and they have a fearlessness and a ruthlessness that I just haven't seen out of the political left, which I do overall identify with. My political sentiments at least go in that direction. So the political angle really did kind of throw me off a little bit because I just wasn't sure where this was going, or if we're supposed to take this movement seriously as a real threat to the American military, the police state, the forces of armed repression that exist within our own society and have been there in place for decades, if not longer, even though we're kind of seeing it in a pretty brutal manifestation right now with ICE and all the funding and the way they're treating undocumented immigrants and people like that, and even American citizens for that matter. So I had to figure out as I was watching the movie, where am I at with this? Because like I say, some of the political stuff just felt kind of more unconvincing to me. And I also felt like in some ways they worked a little too hard, Paul Thomas Anderson and the other screenwriters, in trying to maybe tamp down some of the more alienating aspects of the revolutionaries, like the fact that the movement really kind of gets shattered or disrupted when Perfidia Beverly Hills has to almost reluctantly shoot and kill somebody in the bank robbery because he will not stop approaching her, and so she takes him out. And that is kind of like the critical moment where things went haywire, because she took somebody's life, seemingly, wishing she didn't have to do that. And I really felt like, in the earlier scene when they were releasing all the, detained people, the immigrants, presumably, that had been kind of locked up, and they overwhelm the security. They get in there and they orchestrate a big escape where a lot of these detained folks are put into the back of a semi-truck and taken off to who knows where, but they're taken out of detention so they could presumably re-enter society for who knows how long. I don't think that they took anybody out through violent means in that scene. I might be wrong, but it felt to me like they just kind of put out their guns, stick up your hands, and they kind of just took over the place without actually having to engage in serious armed combat. And I thought, that would never happen. I mean, if they're going to really try to break into a detention center, they may have some element of surprise in their favor, but they're going to be shooting and killing people. They're going to probably blow stuff up. They're going to be committing, pretty significant acts of aggression and homicide for the righteous cause that they're pursuing, at least in their own values, right? Their own judgments, that it's worth it. They have to kill some of the establishment military forces in order to, pursue the revolution. But PTA doesn't really show any of that. In fact, he sort of makes it seem like they just want to, free the people without exacting as heavy a cost on the enemy. And so I felt like in some ways he's kind of sanitizing the way the revolution would really conduct itself if they were, a legitimate alternate political force trying to punish the military and the security state of the United States of America. So that's a pretty long ramble there, but that was a pretty significant obstacle for me. Further reflection helped me to realize that this was a little bit more of I would almost say like a fantasy version of what a leftist revolution would look like, that was primarily led by Black people, in particular Black women. They seem to be the dominant voices and forces, whereas the Leonardo DiCaprio character is just a side guy. He's the guy who does technical stuff, explosives and fireworks and even distractions, because he's got some technical ability to do all that, but he's really not the ideological leader, and he's really not the guy who even brings a lot of theory or leadership or planning of what the next step in the revolution is going to be. He just kind of follows directions and uses his skills to support the bigger effort that other people are making the decisions about. I appreciate that. I like the idea that he's not like a white savior here to, show the women and the minorities the way, and that he himself is kind of a bumbling clod. He's actually more of an obstacle towards getting the job done, especially once the movie gets going. Then he is a kind of a force to be reckoned with. He succeeds almost despite himself, or in some ways he's just an observer of things that are happening through the initiative of other people. So that's my biggest hang-up with the politics. But then as I've kind of reflected on the film, I recognize that this is more of a dark comedy in some ways. The Lockjaw character, played by Sean Penn, is sinister and kind of menacing for sure, and he is an embodiment of a certain kind of mythos, or an ethos, I guess is probably a better word, that really idealizes and epitomizes unapologetic toxic masculinity. He wouldn't put it in those terms, but he's just like, he's tough as nails, he's ruthless, he's very sure of the rightness of his own cause, and his perspective is not to be questioned or challenged. However, then there's the whole interracial thing, as he's trying to get in with this Christmas Adventurer Society or club or whatever it is. And again, the lampooning of white supremacy and conspiracy theories and secret cabals that control national politics and economics behind the scenes. And if you're just, you've got the right genes and the right connections and an unwavering dedication to the cause, you can kind of find your way into these positions of secretive privilege and power. So again, another kind of comedic, dark fantasy of how these things supposedly work. So as I'm beginning to kind of assess the film overall, I see that this is an entertainment of a particular sort for people who are kind of intellectually well-informed, but from a left-wing perspective, something that is, full of ideas and creative energy, possibilities. And then so I feel like, yeah, that's a movie that's made for an audience that appreciate cinema on a high level, and Paul Thomas Anderson and all the talent that he's assembled around him for the craft of movie making are highly skilled. I mean, they are really exceptionally talented, dedicated. All of the film references that are built in are kind of fun and enticing for people like myself, because you can sort of go on a little Easter egg hunt and find all kinds of cool stuff. And then for people of color and women who are drawn to these very empowered Black women characters, you don't even have to be, I mean, I admire them in many ways, but I do feel like there's a naivete or a simplicity to how that ideology plays out in the broader discourse. And I feel like this movie kind of limits its potential impact because people who don't sort of instinctively align with that perspective politically, even if they're not right wing per se, but they're kind of more sort of normie, middle, moderate types, they are going to maybe feel like this is really hard left and really radical and really provocative. And it's because they're maybe not accustomed to seeing Black women in particular speak out without inhibition and without deference. And that probably is still going to be off-putting to a lot of the, middle class, potential viewers. Whereas if this was more of a little less of that radicalism and a little bit more of just a straightforward, not apolitical, but less political thriller, adventure, rescue, suspense story, this film might do better box office. And if it wasn't quite as long, it might also have drawn in more people. And it's because while the film delivers what its niche audience of core supporters find very gratifying and fulfilling, I can see all of that. There is a limit to how far that audience will go, or can grow, I should say. And so I do wonder, yeah, I mean, I'm really glad that this movie exists. I'm glad that we have it. I'm looking forward to seeing it again, although I haven't made it a top priority to get back to the theater right away. I may let it sit for a while. Having seen it in my IMAX already, I might just go more for a conventional format and just see how it plays at a smaller scale. Some of it I felt was almost a little bit gratuitous. I groaned when the American Girl needle drop came at the end, I'll admit that, because it just felt so on the nose and so obvious. There's a smugness to it, maybe, is what I'll say. And yeah, it's a movie that I thought had a lot of great things going for it. I probably haven't maybe sufficiently praised it, maybe, although I think I did at the beginning. That's way too much, so I'll have to start editing now. But that's my take on One Battle After Another.